Hey, good morning. Patricia Murphy here. It's Saturday. This is Seattle Now. Today we're bringing you the best from the KUOW Newsroom. First, one of Seattle's oldest businesses is also one of its biggest polluters. The Ash Grove cement plant is hard to miss if you ever go over the West Seattle Bridge. Every day, the plant burns natural gas and thousands of old tires for fuel. Some neighbors are fighting the plant's push to burn more tires. John Ryan has more.
The Ash Grove cement plant has been on the banks of the Duwamish River for nearly a century. In recent years, community groups in the area have been clashing with the plant over its air pollution. Late last year, the Duwamish River Community Coalition protested outside the offices of the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency. The Duwamish Valley has some of the region's highest rates of childhood asthma and some of the worst air pollution. The activists were hoping to influence the agency's decision on a permit to let Ash Grove increase its tire burning. To heat up its cement kiln, the plant burns natural gas and more than 1 million tires a year. The protest targeted the company's request to use tires for more than a third of its fuel. Mia Ayala Marshall is with the Duwamish Coalition.
Tires, we know, are bad for the air pollution. It can emit toxic pollutants like dioxins and furans and mercury, which are really bad for human health. They are cancerous, can cause respiratory and cardiovascular issues.
The Air Agency in December gave Ash Grove permission to boost its tire burning. The agency found that burning tires at the very high temperatures found inside a cement kiln would not increase pollution. Environmentalists appealed that decision in January. I requested interviews with the Clean Air Agency, but they said they're not allowed to do that while an agency decision is being appealed. So then I tried to go straight to the source of the pollution. I'm outside the Ash Grove cement plant in the Duwamish Valley. If you've ever been on the West Seattle Bridge, you've probably seen its concrete domes and silos and its massive kiln. That kiln spins on its side like a giant rolling pin, except it's 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit inside. The company declined repeated requests for a tour of the plant and an interview. Ash Grove spokesperson Carolina Lucaroni did respond in writing to some written questions. Lucaroni says burning tires keeps them from being dumped or exported to developing countries. And she says using tires as fuel lets the plant burn less natural gas and contribute less to climate change. Cement is essential for all kinds of construction. The cement industry is also one of the most harmful for the climate. It causes at least 5% of worldwide carbon emissions. The Ash Grove plant behind me is the largest single source of planet heating pollution in King County. It's also the largest source of gases that harm human health, like nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide, and ammonia. It's the number 2 source of particulates and sulfur dioxide after the Ardagh glass plant, just a mile from here.
The Duwamish Valley experiences cumulative pollution from both international airports, the railroads, the ports, as well as any number of industries that operate. And so any increase in emissions in a community that's already overburdened by air pollution is unacceptable.
That was Mia Ayala Marshall with the Duwamish River Community Coalition. The Ash Grove plant is currently operating under a pollution permit from 20 years ago. The Clean Air Agency is proposing to update that permit to meet newer federal standards. It has also required Ash Grove to test its emissions for particulates, dioxins, and heavy metals, including arsenic and lead, to make sure the increased tire burning isn't making Duwamish Valley air dirtier. A hearing on the environmental group's appeal to make Ash Grove burn fewer tires isn't expected until next year. John Ryan, KUOW News.
Next, as the Trump administration intensifies its immigration crackdown, the impact is reaching far beyond the border. These policy shifts are creating a state of limbo for people who are following a legal process here in the Pacific Northwest, including those who are nearly U.S. citizens. N3 freelance reporter Johanna Bejarano explains.
Tenemos la doctora Consuelo.
In the Yakima Valley, Sofia Acosta, legal services manager with La Casa Hogar, gives a tour of their legal clinic.
Si tienen preguntas de la ciudadanía, ¿verdad? No saben si aplicar, los animamos a que vengan a una consulta aquí con nuestro equipo. Ya saben, en Perry Tech, La Casa Hogar.
If you don't know how to apply for citizenship, you have questions about applying, we can help you here, she says. People interested in applying for citizenship walk through the door to learn more.
Los esperamos.
Becoming a citizen in the U.S. is a years-long process. First, you have to have your green card. Then, you have to do a background check, take an exam, and pass an interview. But this year, she says, would-be citizens are dealing with even more challenges. Canceled naturalization ceremonies.
We did have a good amount that were canceled, which is alarming for us.
She says 18 ceremonies that were scheduled for January and February were canceled. 4 have since been rescheduled.
We followed up and called USCIS for a good amount of these cases, and they said no, they're still on the wait list to get their appointment for their ceremony. It was just an internal issue.
She says it's not something she's seen happen before.
Not this amount ever. Maybe here like 1 or 2, either because of the weather, cause of cancellation, or maybe some other factor, but never this many. This is definitely unprecedented.
For 74-year-old Avelino Gonzalez, December 12th was supposed to be the day he finally became an American citizen. Gonzalez is from Cuba, but has called the U.S. home since 1996. His naturalization ceremony was scheduled in Yakima, Washington. But the day before the event, his lawyer gave him the news. The ceremony was canceled.
It was as if it had been splashed by a bucket of cold water.
His lawyer, Eilish Villamalon, with Central Washington Legal Aid, says there was no formal letter or explanation from U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Months later, it has still not been rescheduled.
Really, all you can do is wait. There's no kind of appeal process right now because the ceremony's just been canceled.
Gonzalez says he feels canceling his ceremony is unfair.
It's quite unfair. I can't wrap my head around it, but we have to adapt to the system and follow the orders we're given.
Villamalon says being from Cuba might have played a part. It's on a list of dozens of countries the Trump administration deemed high risk.
Those folks' process basically are being stopped. So not just for citizenship, but also for work permits or green cards or for asylum process.
But Sofia Acosta at La Casa Hogar says the ceremonies she's seen canceled involve individuals of Mexican nationality. Mexico is not on that list. In a written statement, USCIS spokesperson Matthew Trageser said the previous administration was, quote, rubber stamping applications. He says the agency is now doing a more rigorous vetting process. I'm Johanna Bejarano reporting.
Next, many of the orcas captured and sent to marine theme parks in the 1960s and 70s came from the Pacific Northwest. An incident 50 years ago this month changed that. A staffer in then Washington Governor Dan Evans' office witnessed a crew hired by SeaWorld chasing a pod of orcas into a shallow bay. The crew used a seaplane, boats, and explosives to corral 6 orcas. A court case ensued, and within 2 weeks, SeaWorld agreed to end captures in Washington state. To learn more about the orcas that came to be known as the Bud Inlet 6, Kim Malcolm reached out to people who knew about what happened 50 years ago, including Ellie Kinley, a mother, a fisher, and a member of the Lummi Nation.
Her people call orcas Quahalmichtan, the people who live beneath the sea.
We always referred to them as people. In our stories, we say Quahalmichtan are relatives that put on their regalia and go under the water.
Before the 1960s and 70s, and films like Free Willy and Blackfish, many non-tribal residents of the Northwest did not feel such kinship with the now widely loved creatures, and few protested when they were captured and sent to marine parks. Environmental journalist and author Linda Mapes has written extensively about orcas in the Northwest.
People thought orcas were menaces. They thought they were to be shot on sight. Fishermen commonly shot them because they didn't want them raiding their nets.
Those fears had started to shift by the mid-1970s, and the business of displaying orcas in theme parks was thriving. SeaWorld had worked around loopholes in the Marine Mammal Protection Act, passed by Congress in 1972, to keep capturing orca calves, mainly in waters bordering Washington and British Columbia, known as the Salish Sea. Then, on March 7th, 1976, a SeaWorld crew trapped a pod of nomadic orcas in Budd Inlet on South Puget Sound in view of the state capitol in Olympia. Ralph Monroe, who worked in the governor's office, happened to be there, sailing with his then-wife Karen and some friends. Linda Mapes later interviewed Monroe about that day for the Seattle Times.
There was a whole pod of whales coming towards us. They were swimming really fast and on the surface. Then we realized that there was a boat chasing them.
Monroe said the crews used a seaplane, boats, and explosives to corral the animals.
Then the whales realized they were out of space, and they turned and made a run for it. And by that time, the big fishing boat, Pacific Mate, had set a set net across the bay. As they closed the net ends, it really got gruesome.
The crew separated calves from their families. What Monroe saw and heard that day haunted him for the rest of his life.
You could hear the whales screaming to each other back and forth. I can still hear it sometimes. It was disgusting and sick. Just the sounds that whales make, but they were frantic. I will never forget it.
Karen Monroe Ellick remembers staying on the water for hours to witness the details of the captures and what happened next.
Ralph and I talked about it on the way back and said, we better call our friends in the press. And the next morning, Ralph went out to get the paper real early and said, we've won round one. It's on page 1 of the PI.
Ralph Monroe also called his boss, Governor Evans, and the state attorney general, Slade Gorton, who helped spearhead a lawsuit against SeaWorld. Amazingly, perhaps, by today's standards, in just over 2 weeks, a judge ruled against SeaWorld. On March 23, 1976, 50 years ago today, the theme park owners agreed to stop capturing orcas in Washington state. Years later, Monroe remembered it as a groundbreaking moment.
This is all new territory. Trying to save a whale, we won. And it was the last whale capture in America.
The Budd Inlet 6, members of a species now known as Biggs orcas, were released. The whales were relatively rare visitors to Puget Sound back then, since the state had promoted killing off their preferred prey, seals and sea lions. Now, their population is thriving. On the other side of what Ralph Monroe and others witnessed that day 50 years ago was Jeff Foster, a 19-year-old member of the capture crew. He says he saw things differently at the time.
It was, a really exciting thing. It's a bit of a rodeo, but it's super exciting for a young guy who doesn't know any better. Part of, my feeling was bringing these animals into captivity. We learn more about these animals and their behavior and their intelligence.
Foster kept working with capture crews in Iceland until 1990, but over time, his reservations grew. Now he works with groups like the Whale Sanctuary Project to help transition marine animals from parks to ocean sanctuaries. Ralph Monroe went on to become a 5-term Washington Secretary of State. He died last year on March 20th, the same day a newborn Biggs orca was spotted for the first time in the Salish Sea. The calf, a descendant of one of the Budd Inlet 6, was later nicknamed Monroe. There's a somber coda to the end of orca captures in the United States. A group of whales, now known as southern resident orcas, had made the Salish Sea their home for thousands of years, and they suffered the brunt of the capture era. Their numbers totaled approximately 110 prior to the 60s and 70s. Around 50 of them were captured and taken to marine parks. Others died in the capture process. 3 years ago, Lummi Nation member Ellie Kinley was involved with a group working to release the last captive southern resident orca, a 57-year-old known as Tokatai, from the Miami Seaquarium. The rescue team was days away from transporting Tokatai back to Washington state when she suddenly died. She had spent 53 years in captivity.
I felt like a member of my family had died. It hurt that bad because it was so important for us to bring her back home to her waters to send the message to the rest of the southern residents that we see you're in trouble. We know you need help. And to us, that was part of the message, that we could bring their stolen daughter back.
Kinley hopes people can still make a difference in how orcas are treated around the world. And she says she'll keep sharing stories about them.
Because you never know when that story might reach that one person that actually can make a difference.
50 years on from the legal victory that ended orca capture in Washington state and ultimately nationwide, the southern resident orca population hasn't rebounded. They struggle with fewer salmon to eat, polluted waters, and noisy, dangerous shipping traffic. Many young calves die before their first year of life. Approximately 76 southern residents remain. Kim Malcolm, KUOW News.
And now, the sun is finally setting later into the evening, a great time of year to get out, maybe appreciate some local art. Seattle is home to the first and oldest art walk in the nation. The Pioneer Square Art Walk happens every first Thursday of the month, but there are art walks all over Western Washington, including in Bellingham, where Meet Me Here producer Kyle Norris lives. He was at First Friday earlier this month and has some tips on what to check out next month.
Start downtown on Cornwall Avenue at Allied Arts of Whatcom County. There's one specific thing here that brings a lot of people through the door.
You know, it's like if you're trying to find a good deal on some really nice art supplies, we do have that here.
It's the thrift store inside the Allied Arts space. Meredith Patton is the interim executive director, and she told me the thrift store is jam-packed with art supplies.
We have got party and celebration supplies. We have craft and DIY materials. Bins of glitter. We've got bins of different stamps here of different styles.
Check 1, 2, test.
For like $10, could I walk out of here with like
a bag of stuff? Easily. And maybe a couple pieces of artwork.
Wow.
Yeah.
And tonight there's a woman playing the keyboard and singing the classics.
I'm Cheryl Hodge, and I'm a musician from everywhere. I live in Bellingham. So this is my favorite gig in a lot of ways because I'm not trying to necessarily please an audience. I'm trying to blend in with the art. Something like that.
A few blocks away on Flora Street, dozens of small children are having what seems to be the time of their lives at the Whatcom Museum inside the Family Interactive Gallery. About 20 toddlers wiggle in their tiny chairs, listening to Mark Lindenbaum play the tuba. Pro tip, the entire museum is free and open late on First Fridays. A few blocks over on Holly Street, there is massive construction inside the former Mindport Museum, which has now closed. Roughly a year from now, this building will become a future home, highlighting Coast Salish arts and cultures. In fact, there's already a big mural on the side of the building.
My name's Adania Carnes. I'm a producer with Children of the Setting Sun Productions. We are Indigenous storytellers here in Bellingham, Washington. So for First Friday, when you're walking down the street on Holly, you're going to see our beautiful mural. It's right in the alleyway. It's vibrant, beautiful colors, purples, blues, greens, and the scene is really special because it depicts what you would see pre-contact. The mural has a village site, it has reef net fishing, it has orca whale, it has an eagle, and a fox, and all kinds of elements hidden in this really beautiful mural with many colors, and then it will come alive at night. We're going to light it up with moving elements that are going to be projected onto it.
The June 5th First Friday features Indigenous artists, and you can preview the future home for Coast Salish arts and cultures on Holly Street. The building will officially be known as the Setting Sun Circle.
That was Kyle Norris for KUOW's Meet Me Here. Appreciate you listening to Seattle Now, and thank you to our generous donors for your support. Get in on the spring fundraising drive and click the link in the show notes to support Seattle Now and KUOW financially. You make our show go, and we really appreciate it. Our production team includes Caroline Chamberlain Gomez, Vaughn Jones, Andy Hurst, Brooklyn Jamerson Flowers, and Paige Browning. Greg Kramer does our theme music. Seattle Now and KUOW Public Radio are members of the NPR network. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you soon.